Hello, everyone, and welcome to the latest edition of the Nordic Football Podcast. I'm Steve Wyss. I'm joined as ever by Jonathan Fadugba, and here we are ready for, the latest edition of the season is coming towards a climax now in both Norway and Sweden in particular. So how are you doing, my friend? Exciting times.
Exciting times, Steve. Hello to everyone. And yeah, we are in the final straight now in Sweden particularly. 4 or 5 games to go on the night of recording, and the home straight is in sight. We've got a tasty title race ahead of us. I'm very excited by it, and I'm wondering who is going to take the gold.
Yeah, well, we are going to start in Sweden because there's only 4 rounds left. We are, at the time of recording, in the middle of a match day, though, where, as at the time of recording, Malmö are top on goal difference, but Djurgården have a game in hand, which is coming on Monday night away against Ostersunds. More on that in a moment. But yes, I mean, Malmö are on 56 points, Djurgården 56 with a game in hand, AIK 53, Hammarby 50 with a game in hand. So the gold medal is going to be given to one of those 4 teams. And you mentioned in previous episodes how you were always going to back Malmö pretty much right from the start of the season, from the earlier rounds anyway, and they've not really disappointed you, have they, in recent times? They keep going on a really long winning run here and putting a lot of pressure on the Stockholm teams, John.
That's correct, Steve. They are on a very, very good run, to be fair to them. 5 wins in a row. The last defeat was against Djurgården back in August now. If it hadn't been for that game, then they would have the title race firmly in their hands, you'd imagine. But they did not manage to win that one. But every other game since 6th of April, they have either won or drawn. That is how good they've been in the last few months. But Djurgården are just about holding them off. I'd fully expect Djurgården to get the win at Ostersunds. You'd think to set up a 3-point gap if they can, or even if they get a point, they'd be 1 point ahead with 4 games remaining. So we really are entering crunch time at the moment. And yes, Malmö showing no signs of slowing down with their recent form.
Yeah, the destiny is very much in the hands of Djurgården. 13 points. That will be enough for them to secure the title. They've got 5 games left to do it. So 4 wins and a draw will do the job for them. I think it's time we are going to have a significant chunk of this podcast dedicated towards the team in focus of Djurgården, because I think it's fair to say start of the season expectations were not low, but they weren't that high either. I can't remember your exact prediction for them in the table, John. I think it was about 4th or 5th. But for them to be in this position, just 5 games to go, gold medal in their hands, I think it's time we talked a little bit more about how they've got in this position, what's worked for them, what hasn't, and in-depth focus. We used to do this with some episodes in the past. But, Djurgården, first of all, pre-season, your general thoughts were more on the positive side, actually, but I know you were concerned about their attack force in particular.
Yeah, I can't recall my exact comments on them in pre-season. You're right, I did have them lower down the table. I think it was between 4th and 5th. I think I had Hammarby above them, in fact. So I think they were 5th, I predicted. And the teams I had ahead of them obviously were AIK, I think Häcken as well, and Norrköping. But I've been proved wrong in that sense, and all credit has to go to their new joint managers, Kim Bergstrand and Thomas Lagerlof. As you've said there rightly, we haven't really talked too much about Djurgården this season, and it's time for a deep dive. We used to do these teams in focus a few seasons ago on the podcast, and I very much enjoyed them. And this week we are going to delve into Djurgården. Now, the first thing to note, of course, is this is a major push for the title race. They have 4 games left if they can beat Ostersunds, 5 games, obviously, if you include that game. And it is a golden opportunity to win their first league title in 14 years. That's the last time Djurgården were champions of Sweden. A long time for such a big club. Those who might not know about them, they're one of Stockholm's biggest clubs. They have the famous Tvilling Derby with AIK. They're 2 derby rivals in Stockholm, obviously AIK and Hammarby, but a major rival of theirs is AIK, who we'll talk about shortly in terms of the results this season, which are ironic. But the way Djurgården have played the season under the joint managers Bergstrand and Lagerlof has been really, really impressive. And I think that's the first place to really discuss those two managers.
Yeah, it's not something that usually works anywhere, is it? But how have they actually managed to achieve it, do you think? I mean, is it just these guys are suited to the role like that? Or I know they've had a little bit of experience before, which I think you might want to sort of talk about more in detail now. But it just seems with these two guys, it works even at such a big club.
Yeah, of course. And there's been previous discussions. I think we've talked about it before, in fact, on one show. Can it work? The joint partnership, the joint managers. And in many cases, some of you might remember Gerard Houllier and Roy Evans back in the day at Liverpool. And in a lot of cases, it just doesn't work, does it? But in this case, it has worked like a treat. And you have to give praise to Kim Bergstrand, who, it must be said, he's had a fantastic managerial career to date, really. He began his career, I mean, his big break in terms of major clubs was at Bromma Poikina. He was there for sort of 5-6 years. And after his playing career, he played for, funnily enough, AIK and Hammarby. So not exactly Djurgården's friends there, but he had a decent playing career. And then his coaching career led him to Bromma Poikina, where he was there for 7 years before moving to IK Sirius. Now, you might remember, Steve, that first season when Sirius were promoted was a special season for us because that was one of the first years of our podcast. And Sirius were newly promoted at that time, but they did fantastically well, finishing 7th. And I don't know if you remember this, Steve, but they were second in the league after a handful of games. And for a long time in the season, the newly promoted boys were sort of second and third. And do you remember that? We kept talking about them and how well they were doing.
Yeah, I remember, actually. It's very interesting that they seem to be overachieving in that regard there. But what about tactics then? Have they employed the same system at Djurgården as they did at Sirius, or have they changed their approach?
Well, this is the thing. I mean, Bergstrand, that was the end of his time there, really, because he the following season they didn't do as well. Last season, had a bit of a dip. They finished 7th in his first season there, and then at the end of last season, that was enough for him, and his 6-year time at Sirius came to an end, and it was Djurgården who swooped in to take him as their manager. And look at the results; it's been a fantastic achievement, and a fantastic signing from the club. He's transformed the team. I mean, I think this is one of those situations where the stars have kind of aligned a little bit as well, in a sense. What I mean by that is this is not only two very good experienced sort of coaches, joint managers who've come in, Thomas Lagerlof as well, but also they've got things generally right in their recruitment, I think, over the last few years. And I think the combination of the two has led to this pretty unlikely title challenge, to be honest. It wasn't really expected. I think they were tipped in the main between sort of 4th, maybe 3rd, but no real hints that they'd be champions, to be honest. Most people ticked Malmö, and obviously Malmö could still win it, but let's focus on Djurgården for this episode. But if you really look at it, everything they've done so far has been really solid. They've built a really cohesive unit. They're very well coached, Djurgården. If you look at their statistics, for example, they're the best team in the league for ball possession, best team in the league for passes into the final third. They've got the joint fewest goals conceded, second most touches in the box behind Malmö. They're really doing well in terms of expected goals, and pretty much, in every area, in every metric, they are looking very, very solid. And they're going to be very hard to stop, I think, in their last 4 games, but they do have challenges to come.
Yeah, I'm just looking at the league table now, and the statistic that stands out to me is they've only conceded 14 goals. Malmö have also only conceded that amount, but it surely must be a case of their big strength is keeping clean sheets, is keeping it tight. And who would you say the key players have been in terms of their defensive solidity? Well,
if we look at Kim Bergstrand in general, he's a Guardiola Ait. He's talked before about Pep Guardiola and his inspiration. He was a striker in his day himself, Bergstrand, and as I mentioned, he played for AIK and Hammarby. And he's said before he'd rather win a game 4-3 than win a game 1-0. So it is a little bit unusual maybe that he's built a team that's so solid defensively. But, obviously they're very good at coaching that defensive unit. He was good at Sirius in that regard as well. But they do have that enterprising element to them, and he does want to play attacking football. I mean, obviously, Djurgården finished 7th last season. They were 19 points behind AIK. But there's been some changes to the team and some players who've come in, and I think Bosse Anderson, their sporting director, maybe deserves some credit in that sense. When you look at their defensive lineup, and if we talk about their formation, just briefly, they are very fluid. They can play a 4-4-2, a 4-4-1-1, a 4-3-3, or a 3-4-3. Bergstrand said he likes his teams to be tactically fluid and able to change. They have players who can interchange positions very well. And if you look at the back four in itself, I mean, the first choice probably back four would be Aslak Vitry at right back, who was previously at Ranheim, so Norwegian fans may remember him. He's a Norwegian under-18 international at one point as well. He's been really, really good at right back. We'll talk about him in a minute. Marcus Danielsson, who has been arguably the best player in Allsvenskan this season, certainly one of the top 5. At centre back, the former Gifsensvall man, Jacob Une Larsen, who's the centre-back partner in most times. And at left-back, Elliot Shesh, who is, I think he had a spell as well in Norway, but I'm not entirely sure. But he's there at left-back. And, we've got a Y-Scout blog coming out about this team. So tune in for it. Obviously, we have a partnership with Y-Scout. And in that blog, I liken Witry and Sheck to Alexander Arnold and Andrew Robertson. In the way they've had an influence. In their fullbacks are heavily involved. As I mentioned to you, the team has played more passes into the final third. They've also had the most crosses in the league, more than any other team in terms of whipping crosses into the box. And Witry and Sheck have been very, very influential in that area. Each of them has weighed in with a number of assists from those fullback positions, similar to the Liverpool duo. And it's just really, they although they're solid defensively, they also have an attacking element to them.
Yes, you're right. Elliot Sheck, is that how you pronounce it? I always used to call him Kak last year because that's pretty much how he played for Start. He was terrible there. And to be honest with you, Witry, although he did catch the eye at Ranheim, as a player with some potential, I certainly never had him down as a starting defender for a top Allsvenskan side challenging for the title. So those two fullbacks, to me, that suggests that they have been very well coached at Djurgården, because in the past they were never as good as they are now. So you've got to give kudos to the two managers there, I think, and the coaching team at DIF. So yeah, just looking again at some stats, and away from home, they've been brilliant. If they do beat Ostersunds on Monday night, that'd be 29 points on the road for them, which would be 5 points more than any other side. So obviously they are well geared up on the road. They've got good home statistics as well. But is there any particular reason, do you think, that they're comfortable on the travels this year?
Most definitely, I think they are set up very well to play a counter-attacking style. As I mentioned, predominantly a possession-based team. Really, they haven't had the most possession in Allsvenskan, but they do offer also that counter-attacking flair. I think the way they set their game up, you mentioned there. I mean, Sheck was really good in his previous spell in Sweden before he moved to Norway, and I remember talking to you about him last season. And obviously, he didn't do too well and came quickly back with his tail between his legs. But he's been very good. 5 assists. He's in the top 15 players in the league for accurate crosses percentage. According to Y-Scout data, Witry, his fellow man, has also been very, very good in terms of assists, and he's also weighed in with some goals. I think fantasy league players early in the season, they were desperate to have him in their team. He's done extremely well in that sense. But yeah, if you look at their lineup, it's generally a 4-4-2 or a 4-4-1-1, as I mentioned, and they're 2 centre midfielders, Fredrik Ulverstad, who used to be at Burnley at one stage of his career, and Jesper Karlstrom. They generally sit in front of the defensive line and just offer that solidity. And they can play a sort of a deeper formation. lower block and then defend and counter basically when they need to. The perfect example of this was for anyone who saw the game in August between Malmö and Djurgården, which was a really key game, and it could end up deciding the title race. Djurgården won that game off the back of a counter-attacking goal from Mohamed Buya-Toure, who we'll talk about shortly. And it was, one pass from Jonathan Ring, who's been one of the best players in the league this season. 1.04 key passes per 90. He's been fantastic. 5 assists and 7 goals, by the way, for him. It was one pass from him into the flanks, in a quick counter-attack. Then a cross into the box, caught Malmö off guard, and Buya-Toure first-time finish, sending the Djurgården fans absolutely crazy, by the way, in the stands. Great celebrations. And that was an example of their ability away from home to kind of sit deep and counter. They're not generally that way inclined. I mean, they can take the game to their opponents away. A recent example of that was when they beat GIF Sundsvall 4-1 in a recent game. So they do have that ability to control possession and control the game away from home when it demands it. So, I think what Kim Bergstrand and Lagerlöf have done very well with this team is they've got the balance right in all games. In Allsvenskan, you don't have to always be the best team, to be honest. You don't need kind of incredible players. It's very tight at the top in terms of the squads and their general capabilities. But I think in those key games, you just need that ability to do something out of the ordinary, whether it's a set piece or whether it's a counter attack or just getting that 1-0 win. And they seem to have done it. I mentioned before, funnily enough, Steve, the only 3 games they've lost this season. Can you name me the 2 teams they've lost to this season in their only 3 defeats?
Well, I know they've lost to AIK, so maybe even lost twice to them, I think.
And guess the other one? You're correct.
Oh, God, I don't know. It was early doors, I know that. No, I'll say Norrköping, but I don't know.
The only teams that have beaten them in all season are Hammarby and AIK. And that's something you've got to watch out for, Steve, because the old curse, the derby curse of Djurgården, of course, there's this famous statistic that they haven't beaten AIK in the league since 2011. And they've got that derby curse, which has always haunted them. They still haven't been able to shrug that yet. Even though they've been so good, AIK have still done the double on them. And one of their last 5 games is Hammarby at home. So really, I mean, that is the big test of the curse. Can they beat Hammarby? And maybe it might set them up for a title win.
Well, don't they call it the ghost or something of the derby or something like that?
Yeah, they do. I mean, what tends to happen for those who might not be aware, fans of the other Stockholm teams they dress up as ghosts. They turn up to the stadium with ghost flags, ghost banners. They really do rub it in Djurgården's face, to be honest, at times. But one thing to note, obviously, they did lift the curse. It had gone on since, I think, for a while longer than that anyway. I mean, this is a league record now, but they did lift it in the Swedish Cup last season to win the Cup. But they've not been able to beat AIK in the league for, as I mentioned, 8 years.
It's certainly not Casper the Friendly Ghost, is it, for them? I'll say that much. But let's move on to some of the more attack-minded players. And we mentioned Mohamed Buya-Toure. But he scored 11 goals for them in the league, weighed in with a few assists as well. Jonathan Ring, 7 goals, 5 assists. And a new signing, which you talked about this a few weeks ago, that Emir Kujovic may be the difference between winning the title and not. He's come in and scored and already made a big impact in just 5 appearances. So, I mean, those players going forward are obviously very important for them.
Most definitely, Steve. And I think Kujovic just adds that little bit of extra firepower that they needed. I mean, Buya-Toure, we've talked about him a lot in the past. Him and his antics, there's a fantastic player in there, but he does tend to be a little bit, wild in the head at times. A good example of this was against Helsingborg, and that just shows you why Kujovic is so necessary. A few weeks back, they played Helsingborg at home. It was one of Kujovic's first games since joining in the summer. He scored 2 goals to win the match. But in that game, what actually happened was Buya-Toure elbowed a player in the face and picked up a yellow card. He was very, very lucky not to be sent off. And funnily enough, Thomas Lagerlöf came out afterwards and slammed Buya-Toure, saying, he could, in fact, the exact quote was, he could have put this whole title race in the shit. So he wasn't mincing his word. He was really annoyed. And basically said that, Buya-Toure could have cost the whole title if he'd been sent off. So Kujovic, having him as a bit of backup maybe was a very good signing, I think, and needed. So Buya Toure was suspended for the next game against GIS Sundsvall, and Kujovic came in, scored a goal, and just generally played well. I think he will be important. And yeah, the two of them have done well. We mentioned Jonathan Ring as well. As I said, he's had a fantastic season, and he's probably been one of the top 5 or 6 players, maybe top 10 players in the league, given his just all-round creativity. Really, really improved himself there. So yeah, I mean, the thing with Buya Toure, of course, is he's only on loan from a Belgian club, St. Troiden, so he may well leave at the end of the season. And there's been kind of rumours that maybe Djurgården don't really want to necessarily pay the money to keep him. So having Kujovic in there as well is important. But Buya Toure's counter-attacking ability, his pace on the break. I mean, the winner he scored against Falkenberg was fantastic. He has the ability to, on counter-attacks, just beat 2 or 3 men and run like half the length of the pitch, which he did against Falkenberg. If you get a chance to see that goal, it's worth watching, because it was a really, really good goal. And the other thing is they've got goals coming from all over the team as well, Steve. Haris Radisnak has scored. As we mentioned, Witry and Ishek have also weighed in with goals. Jesper Karlstrom's weighed in with a few. And I think a really key player that we haven't discussed and a really, really important boon in their title race was the old Englishman, Curtis Edwards.
An interesting statistic for you. You talked about Marcus Danielsson earlier. They average 2.5 points per game when he's in the side. He's only missed 3 matches, but in those particular games, they lost twice and drew 1. So he's obviously, I mean, that's ridiculous, isn't it, to average so many points per game when you're involved like that. But I want to talk about the club itself, Djurgården, because there's a big rivalry in Stockholm, Djurgården, Hammarby, AIK, and I mean, I know from when I first used to do Swedish football, certainly between Djurgården and Hammarby, it's a social class rivalry sort of thing going there. But who would you say is, I mean, this is a bit of a silly question in a way, but I'm going to ask it anyway. I mean, who do you think is the biggest of the 3 clubs? And in terms of the actual rivalries there for Djurgården, would they rather beat Hammarby or AIK?
Would Djurgården rather beat Hammarby or AIK?
If they had to, yeah.
Well, I mean, your first question is a very tough one. Who's the biggest of the 3 clubs? They always have that kind of beef between them of like who is the best. There's always that kind of discussion between the Stockholm clubs. I mean, Hammarby in terms of attendance tend to dominate, and they do enjoy rubbing it in the face in terms of attendances. They do tend to get maybe better crowds. AIK as well. I mean, the derby between AIK and Djurgården some weeks ago was what it said a record, in fact, for attendance. It was somewhere in the 40,000s, which is, this is like, we shouldn't underestimate. I mean, I know Nordic football at times gets a bit of a bad rep, but these are massive games wherever you are in Europe. If you ever get the chance to go to a Stockholm derby, you really must take up the opportunity. I mean, the tifos, the banners. I know this has been a major talking point in Sweden this season. The police and the heavy clampdowns on all these kind of things. The flares and stuff. But it really adds flavour and colour to the league. And when you are at one of those derbies, it really is. You've got 45,000 fans there. It's difficult to rival it in any European league. To be honest, it's very, very intense battles, and they really have real animosity. And it really means a lot to the fan. If we look at title races, I mean titles won sort of thing. Hammarby have only ever won the league once, so you can't really have them at the top really there. But it's very hard. It's very hard to say. AIK obviously won the title the most times. I mean, in terms of overall trophies, sorry, including runners-up and that kind of thing. But Djurgården have won the title 7 times in their history, so one more than AIK. But yeah, I mean,
what sort of
I find it hard to really say who the biggest club is.
What sort of club are Djurgården then, in terms of who would enjoy supporting them? If you were a neutral right now listening and you had to pick between one of the 3 Stockholm clubs to support, what would be the really attractive features of Djurgården, do you think?
The attractive features, they've got a great fan culture. I think they are very well supported in terms of, in Stockholm, they are one of the biggest teams. They are one of the most popular teams. Obviously, at present, they kind of they share their Tele2 arena between them and Hammarby, so they both have the same stadium in that sense. And that's where the comparison comes in terms of attendances. They tend to kind of have a bit of a beef in that sense. Obviously, AIK have the Friends Arena, which is 54,000 stadium in Solna. So, they're slightly maybe out of town. I think it's a difficult one to really answer. I mean, I think I've never really been based in Stockholm, so I wouldn't be the one to talk about the fan culture maybe from experience. Gothenburg is more my territory in terms of knowing exactly the ins and outs of the fan culture, I won't lie. But from the outside looking in, I think Djurgården, there's no doubt they're very well supported. I think Hammarby get the best attendances on average in general, but AIK as well are, like I say, they have the biggest stadium. So, you also got to throw Malmö into the mix there in terms of biggest clubs in Sweden and the EFK. Obviously, those two have had more titles than any of the Stockholm teams. And I think that's something that both of them want to maybe look at and try and improve. All of them really want to try and improve that because, it's the big city of the country, isn't it? But, interestingly, between Djurgården and obviously AIK, they were formed roughly in the same time. So that's where the whole twin derby comes from. They were considered, as I say, city twins, and they've got very similar backgrounds. Hammarby are a little bit more maybe the new kids on the block in that sense. But all three of them really generally are highly well supported, and it's just slightly different. As you mentioned, culturally, they are slightly different.
Yeah, so I tell you what, it always reminds me a little bit of the Istanbul clubs, Galatasaray, Besiktas, Fenerbahce, three big clubs in the city. And, in terms of Stockholm, it's really, sometimes there's not a lot to choose between either of them. And that is certainly the case this year. But going back to this title race, if they're going to get over the line, they're going to not just need, technical abilities on the field. They're going to need the mental strength. They're going to need big players to stand up. And you said the best player in the Allsvenskan this year has been Marcus Danielsson, in your opinion. I talked about his statistics there. What is it about him that makes him so good at the moment?
Well, he's been a fantastic player to the point where people were there was actually a bit of outrage really when he didn't get into the Sweden squad for the most recent international games. And obviously there's not too many Allsvenskan players, if any, in the national team. They usually have left long ago before then. He's not only just attracted the attention of fans and also people in Sweden. Victor Lindelof, the Manchester United centre back, has said that he wishes that Djurgården will win a title simply because he used to play with Danielsson together. The two defenders used to play with each other at Västerås in the third division some years ago. Lindelof started his early days were there in Sweden anyway, before moving to Benfica and then Manchester United. But Danielsson's just been a very, very, very good signing. I think you've got to look at it and say when he was at GIF Sundsvall in his final season there a couple of years back, he was good, but I don't think it was really expected how well he's done. He's really embraced the club Djurgården. He's become captain. I think his height plays a massive part because they don't have the biggest defense, to be honest. Sheck, Witchery, they're all quite impish lads. They're quite small. Even Una Larsson is only 5'11". So they aren't the biggest team, but I think what they offer with Danielsson, he's 6'4", towering centre back. He's extremely good in the air from counter attack situations. He's also good going forward. In both boxes, he can defend or attack. Aerial duels wise, he's one of the top players. I think his leadership qualities as well has been outstanding. He's recently renewed his contract, and as I say, he's become sort of the captain figure, the leader figure. He said as well he doesn't see himself leaving. He's not keen to leave unless a big team comes in for him. He's become sort of fans' favourite. He's just, I think he's been one of the most impressive players in the league. And even, as I say, Bergstrand has said he's one of the top players, along with, Murma Tankovic at Hammarby is obviously the one you can't ignore. But I think defensively, last season Hammarby had a player who went to the Bundesliga 2 who I really rated in defence, Bjorn Paulsen. And I think this season Danielsson's probably been that star man across the divisions really in terms of in terms of what he's done from a defensive point of view.
Okay, so it's getting to really crunch time now. If we give Djurgården the win on Monday night away at Ostersunds, and let's say we give Hammarby their win as well, home against Örebro, so that would make it 59 for Djurgården, 56 for Malmö, 53 Hammarby, and AIK 53 as well. So, but there are some crunch games left. Hammarby against Djurgården at the weekend. Hammarby also still have to play Malmö, and Malmö have to play AIK. So, I mean, where's your money then, John, for this title? Who's going to secure the gold medal, do you think?
Well, I mean, it's a difficult one, isn't it? Because if you look at the league table, it's very, very tight, as you've just mentioned there. I mean, if you're pushing me, and I don't want to disappoint Djurgården fans at the end of this long team in focus about them, but I think they have got a lot to do still. Let's not forget that they've not won the league before. They don't have that experience. They've not done it for, like I say, 14 years. They don't have that experience. Malmö do have that experience. AIK won it last season, although AIK have had a few disappointing results of late. I think the loss to Hammarby and the draw at Elfsborg this weekend was a really surprising few drops of points there at Elfsborg for sure. Malmö, for me, they're just not going away. I mean, there's been a bit of mind games in the recent times with between Uwe Rosler, the Malmö manager, and Djurgården. He's complained. He's done a bit of what I think Jose Mourinho and Ferguson used to do very well. Complained about the fixture list. He said that why are Malmö playing 7 games in such a short period of time? 7 games in 21 days, I think it is. And he's complained about the fact that Djurgården have got more rest. For example, playing tomorrow on the Monday night, compared to Malmö playing a day earlier. He's had a few complaints about that, and that's kicked off a little bit of a beef. The thing with Malmö is just, if you look at the overriding metrics in terms of expected goals and that kind of thing, they do look good. They do have the best, highest expected goals of the league, and they do have the best expected goals against, I believe, in the league as well. So from that point of view, just purely from mathematics, you'd say that they'd be the favourite, and they're just not going away. I said in pre-season that I thought Malmö would not win the league. I went for Norrköping as the outsider. My feeling was there would be an outsider, but I did get it wrong with Norrköping. But the reason that I felt that with Malmö is just that I just find them a little bit stale at times, and I think that Djurgården game showed it. They probably should have won. They had a much higher expected goals, missed a penalty, but I just feel they're a little bit functional at times and don't get the job done when needed, but they just won't go away. And I think Djurgården are going to need to win at least 4 of those last 5 games to win the title. And if you look at their running, they've got Hammarby, they've got Norrköping away, they've got IFK Göteborg, they've got Örebro and Ostersunds. So those are not easy games. So it's all to play for. It's going to be a cracking end to the season. And to be honest, I really can't wait. But there's one thing for sure about Djurgården and Kim Bergstrand and Thomas Lagerlof. They won't give up, and their team will remain solid, enterprising, full of possession, and exciting on the break.
Yeah, it really does look a close finish. And, if a couple of results go the way of some of the contenders as well, then we really could get a tight finish. But, I've got to say, Malmö have looked very good recently, but I think their fixture list is quite tough. IFK Göteborg, Hammarby, AIK. That's 3 fairly tough games for Malmö, so they're going to have to play well. And they're also involved in the Europa League, of course. Which,
that's the key. You're right.
So no gimmies as such there, but
no.
It's going to be very interesting. So we'll switch down.
We move on as well. I just want to end it on. You asked me about the attendance figures and that kind of thing in the sort of Stockholm teams. I have to put it on record there that Hammarby have had the best attendance. The average attendance of Hammarby has been the best of any team in Allsvenskan for the last 5 seasons running. So when you ask me about support-wise, Hammarby fans won't forgive me if I don't mention that. So just thought I'd throw that in there. But as I say, Djurgården are a very well-supported team, one of the biggest teams in Sweden. There's no doubt about that. And at the moment, they're in pole position for the title.
Well, we're going to switch things up now to the bottom of the table, where it's suddenly a lot closer. I mean, AFC Eskilstuna look like they're gone, really. They're not wildly adrift that they're going to need to win 3 or 4 games, aren't they? Which isn't going to happen. But the rest of it, we've seen Valkenburg picked up a win a couple of rounds ago. Sundsvall have won back-to-back games, incredibly, out of nowhere. And there's no sign of Ostersunds picking any points up right now. They are in a huge crisis, aren't they? They're in 13th place, 2 points clear of the drop zone. But there's massive problems at that club, both on and off the field, isn't there, John? And it doesn't look like ending anytime soon.
Correct. Well, they have actually had a little bit of a reprieve this week. There was some very disturbing rumours for their fans, I guess, when it was said that they might even go out of business if they couldn't find, I think it was 10 million Swedish crowns within 2 or 3 weeks. There's been a bit of a reprieve in that sense. The most recent statements from the club have suggested that they found some money. I think they're going to reissue some shares or something like that to try and get around it. So that's at least the club exists, which is a first good step, as any Bury FC fan would say in England. But the problems go on. They're on a wretched run, to be honest. And we discussed them in the last podcast in quite a bit of depth. But things don't get better for them. They've lost both games, I think, since that last podcast, and they are now only 2 points above the drop. They've got a game in hand, but that's Djurgården. So it's really looking difficult for them. 6 defeats on the bounce. They have not won a game since July. They're looking in trouble. I mean, just on GIF Sundsvall, you mentioned their back-to-back wins out of nowhere. That they owe that to their new manager, to be fair, Tony Gustafsson, who's come in and really kind of had an impact, to be fair. So that's another worry for Ostersunds, because they look dead and buried, GIF Sundsvall, and now they're just starting to pick up some points. Now they're only 2 points behind them in that relegation playoff. So if you really look at it, Valkenburg are winning games. GIF Sundsvall are winning games. Even AFC Eskilstuna have picked up a point here and there. I mean, only 1 point, but anyway, 15 points is still a bit of uncomfortable distance. There's only 6 points from Ostersund. So what I'm trying to say is, although they might not catch them, they're not that far away from them.
Yeah, they're not actually miles and miles adrift, are they? So.
Right.
But I mean, just looking at the fixtures that Ostersunds have got left, they've got Djurgården at home, Häcken away, Sirius at home, Hammarby at home, and EFK Göteborg away. I mean, honestly, I just see only one match where they can realistically get any points out of, and that's the Sirius at home game. So they're in huge trouble, aren't they? I mean, do you think could it be third bottom would be a good spot for them, and they can go into the playoffs against the third team in the Superettan? But do you honestly see them picking up many more points?
It's tough, Steve. It's very, very tough. I mean, we talked about them earlier in the season and their expected goals, and it was a worry even from day one when they were picking up points. But they've just tailed off since July. Two points since the 21st of July. In how many? I think 10 games. So 2 points out of 30 is wretched. So, they are really looking in big trouble. And I think, we talked there about Djurgården Malmö. It certainly was striking to me anyway, watching that game. The midfield battle was Curtis Edwards against Fouad Bachiru. Now, these two were both on the pitch, I believe, when they played Arsenal, Ostersunds. And that was only a short sort of, that wasn't even more than 2 years ago. So things have really, really gone downhill fast there. If you look at it, those sort of players are now at top clubs in Sweden. So it's a real shame the way they've fallen, and some of the new players that have come in just, I think sometimes when you're in a club where there's low momentum, it's difficult to adapt to a new environment, isn't it? So you can't really blame the players necessarily, but they just haven't been able to pull out the results that the players like Saman Ghoddos, like Bachiru, like Curtis Edwards were used to. And Edwards has kind of left and in the summer and gone, and there's not many of those players left there now. But I think Valkenburg are another team that we should briefly just touch on, because we don't talk about them much, but they're only 2 points out of it now, and they, they're not looking too bad. And they beat Ostersunds, obviously, in their most recent one of the most recent home games. And their expected goals, as we said for quite a while, they're comfortably sort of lower mid-table when it comes to expected goals. They're doing fine, but they just obviously they don't score them all. But the statistics suggest that they're actually not too bad. 13th in the table when it comes to expected goals.
Well, they've got winnable games. They've got Elfsborg away next, AIK at home, but then they've got Kalmar, and the last match of the season for Falkenberg is AFC Eskilstuna at home. So they've got potential points there. I mean, do you worry about any other teams that could get sucked into it still? I mean, Kalmar, Sirius, Helsingborg, are they safe now for you? Or are they potentially, could they slide? Just say Falkenberg and Sundsvall keep picking up points. Even if Ostersunds get nothing, there's still another relegation spot there that's up for grabs.
Well, no, I think Sirius are on red alert. Okay, Sirius. And if we look at it, I mean, in pre-season, I on the podcast, I thought they'd go down. I think I had them in second. I think I had them second bottom or in the relegation playoff. I was down on them quite heavily, and they won their first 2 games, and obviously made me look like a bit of a mug at the beginning of the season. But don't rule them out, in my opinion, Steve. They've lost their last 3 in a row at EFK, Hammarby, and GIF Sundsvall, which is a big loss away to GIF. And if you look at their upcoming games, their last 4 games are Helsingborg at home, Ostersunds away, AFC Eskilstuna away, Kalmar at home. So that is literally their season it's all in the hands of the lower teams.
It's good and bad, isn't it? Because if you win the game, you've obviously got fixtures against poorer teams, but if you fuck them up, you are in massive trouble, aren't you? What you want to be playing now is you want to be playing Elfsborg and Örebro every week, don't you? Because they're going to be, nothing at stake. They're going to finish 8th or 9th. So, there's always a lot of theory, isn't there, with fixtures and who you want, who you don't now. But it's looking really close down there now.
Well, I thought they'd go down, Sirius, and I've got to say I'm going to stick with that prediction, to be honest. I think that they are still not out of it by any stretch of the imagination, with 3 defeats in a row, as I've mentioned. GIF Sundsvall have got 2 wins on the bounce now. Falkenberg have got at least 1 win in the last sort of 6. Sirius, they've got 4 points in their last 6 games, but they haven't really, of late, been any good. So the only thing that worries me with Falkenberg is their goal difference, which is minus 31. That is a huge goal difference to make up, So if it comes down to points, that's worth an extra point, really, isn't it? If it comes down to that.
It feels like every year the bottom 3 or 4 in this league, their goal difference is like a cricket score, It's just terrible.
If you look at the difference between Malmö and AFC, I mean, plus 34 goal difference against minus 32. That really tells you that this is a league of sort of two divisions in a way, isn't it?
Oh, goodness me, yeah. I mean, AFC Eskilstuna conceded 54 goals in 26 games. That's absolutely ridiculous, isn't it? It's incredible. Just before we finish with Allsvenskan, I mean, Ian Birchnell, he's already got a relegation on his resume. Do you think his experience in that relegation battle with Viking a couple of years ago is a positive or a negative?
For me, it can only be a positive. I think experience lends you some learning and some wisdom. I don't see how that can really be considered too much of a negative. I mean, obviously, it can maybe a sense of the demon starts swirling again, isn't it? And you find yourself in that situation sometimes, and maybe you can't get out of it. I mean, they have the worst form in the table by miles. Only AFC Eskilstuna are even close when it comes to poor form. 6 straight defeats in a row. AFC Eskilstuna have 1 point from their last 6 at least. So they are plummeting like a stale plum, to be honest. And you do worry for them, but I think they have a win in them somewhere. But even would 1 win be enough? I'm not sure. I think.
Well, if it's against Sirius, for example, it depends who it's against, doesn't it?
I think you need about 25 points to stay up in this league now. Can they get 4 points from their last sort of 5 games? They could beat Djurgården tomorrow and everyone will forget about it. But, it's looking difficult.
So who are your predicted? What is your prediction for 16th, 15th and 14th?
I'm going to go with AFC Eskilstuna bottom. I think I think Ostersunds will be second bottom. And I think Sirius will be the relegation playoffs.
Well, you put your money where your mouth is there, fair enough. So, Allsvenskan, that's that section over and done with. So, join us after the break and we will be talking about Norwegian matters. So, see you again very soon.
Welcome back to the Nordic Football Podcast, and we're moving now on to Norway's Eliteserian. We've had a good chat about Sweden. Now it's time for Norway, Steve. You are the man for that country and that region. And I'm going to start off with, we talked about Djurgården as our kind of team in focus this week. And I think, with no disrespect to Malmö, who are top of the table, I think it would be fair to say that the story of this season so far has to be considered to be the title challengers, Bodø Glimt, who are 5 points behind with roughly 7 games to go. An unbelievable achievement considering many people had them tipped to be relegated. I think even you might have had them tipped to be relegated, Steve, if I remember correctly, or maybe not. But you didn't have them this high up the table, and nobody did. Now, let's take a look at them, Steve. I mean, firstly, the win against, this weekend against Tromsø. You watched that game, and what did you have to say about it? And what do you have to say about them in general this season?
Yeah, well, let's start with the game today, the Derby of the North. Actually, it's a history in this fixture. The away team actually does quite well in recent years. Expect the unexpected, but it really went with the form book today. Bodø absolutely battered Tromsø 4-0. And it honestly could have been 7 or 8, and it wouldn't have flattered them. They were so much better. It was a combination of Bodø Glimt playing very, very well. Tromsø really, really poorly. But it sums up Glimt this year. They've been absolutely brilliant. And this started in pre-season, where they were catching the eye with some excellent results, performances, things like that. And a lot of people were dissing them, saying that compared to, for example, some of the other clubs, their pre-season schedule is quite light. They can kind of focus on the matches quite a lot. And no one really, certainly no one expected this. Quite a lot of people predicted them to be relegated. I was not one of those people, I may add. I have not had to eat humble pie, unlike certain people that I have seen have to do that. However, I wouldn't have had them in the top half of the table. I think I predicted them at 11th or something like that. But they've done remarkably well. Central to their success has been a fantastic home record at Aspmyra Stadion, where they've won 9 out of 12 games, scored 34 goals, and only conceded 10. So honestly, at times they look absolutely unbeatable at home. Seriously. You wouldn't even know how they've dropped a point with some of the performances that they've produced here. It's a tough place to go, but magnificent achievements so far from Bodø Glimt, and I really do hope they can get themselves a medal out of this season.
Do you put their success down to coaching or squad ability or the paucity of other teams in the league maybe, or something else? Because if I look at their team, Steve, and the statistics around them, something I find incredible, to be honest. They have the youngest average age of any team in the league. Now, that is really, really rare that you get a team so young being able to, exceed expectations so well to become, from, like you say, a relegation-tipped team to one that's challenging for the title. I mean, I find that remarkable. What do you put this success down to? Because, the faith in youth there is really paying off, isn't it?
Well, I think there's 2 really big factors to consider here, and one is coaching, like you say. The manager, Kjetil Knudsen, has done really well, and I think the whole coaching team up there in Bodø Glimt, including our good friend Tom Dent, is very well organised. They've got some great ability there, and they've got a nice bunch of youngsters that have come through. I mean, a lot said about, I give you an example, Man United, the class of 92. I mean, I'm not saying this is the class of 2019 or whatever, but it does happen to be that certain players like Håkon Evjen, Fredrik Bjørkan have come through the system at the same time, and they've peaked at the same time together. So obviously there's a good system coming through there. They've relied on promoting from within quite a lot. I wouldn't say that it's to do with signings and transfers. They've hardly really signed a player all year of significance. That's probably the best signing has been right back Erlend Reitan. But really, it's not to do with transfers and that. Really, it's easy. You look at development of players from within, and also obviously good coaching and tactics. I mentioned they had a really good pre-season schedule. That's probably helped them going into the year, and they've built on momentum from there. When you win games, it breeds confidence, doesn't it? I mean, just look at when Leicester City won the Premier League. It was a case of when they started to win games, their aspirations got higher. And I think Glimt in the second half of the season have been looking at matches. Yeah, we got to win them. Whereas in the past, they'd be like, yeah, we'll take a draw here. But now the stakes they have dropped points recently. I will add that. But their performances haven't necessarily dipped either. But on paper, I look at the squad, and yes, there is quality. Amor Leuni, who's now been sold, he's already left the club. Håkon Evjen,
where did he go?
He's moved to the Egyptian League. I don't know exactly what the team was called, but he went straight away 2 games ago, and he's out of there. So that's a massive blow for them. Håkon Evjen is moving to AZ Alkmaar at the end of the season. But, Leuni and Evjen, top quality players. And so there is, class in there. But on paper, you would still look at this team and think, it should be somewhere around mid-table, really. So it's remarkable how much they've overachieved.
Fascinating stuff. And that move's confirmed, is it, for Håkon Evjen?
Yeah, I think it's €3 million. So a good move for the player, definitely, to go to the Dutch league. He's going to get probably regular starts there. And you know what? I could see him going quite a long way. Look at the last player that moved to the Dutch league, Shidia Juka, to Heerenveen. He's already starting tearing up the ground there. Had a great start to his career. So I think it will be a good move for Evjen. He's... bear in mind, this is a player that they turned down Manchester City, of course. So that is how highly he's regarded.
Yeah, fantastic stuff there. I didn't realize that, in fact. So tell me about the, because if you look at the metrics of Bodø, they are the team in focus for this week. If we look at their metrics, they're all really, really good. I mean, they have the best one-on-one dribbling in the league by miles. Rosenborg second. If we're looking at the Wisecat data, they're 5th in the league in terms of shots, but they've their goal scoring, they're joint top of the table in terms of goal scoring, just below Mulder in terms of expected goals, but level on goals. What do you put this, the best ball position in the league? I mean, I've seen them play a few times and they've been really, really exciting. Where can they go with this? And you mentioned the word Leicester City there. Are they a Leicester City or, Mulder 5 points clear, so there's still enough time for maybe a change with 7 games left. What's your outlook for Bodø? Where can this team actually go? I mean, Europe would be fantastic. They've never won the title in their history.
They are very much Leicester City-ish in that regard. But the difference is they're up against a high-class team in Mulder who have not dropped many points, and I just don't see them closing it down. If Mulder showed signs of cocking up a few points, then they'd still have every chance. But going forward, I suppose it's now about the long-term ambitions of the club, where they can go from here. I mean, just say they do finish in the top 3, get themselves a medal, then obviously in Europe for next year, they're selling players. They've already lost Leuni, who was a key man. They've got rid of Evjen at the end of the season. They're going to get decent money for him. It's all about how they reinvest in the squad. They've got a really good manager, who I guess he might be poached by someone, because that sort of thing isn't going to go unnoticed, is it? They've got great energy about them. I think they're really well coached and great conditioning of the players as well. They've suffered relatively few injuries. Only really Breda Mu at the back has been out for a long period of time. I mean, apart from Patrick Berg, who was injured in a match earlier in the year, they're obviously well conditioned. They haven't got that much squad depth, which is you'd expect that at Bodø Glimt. And I think ultimately that will be the difference between winning the title and not. But there's no reason why, if they invest well in the winter, keep their manager, keep churning out some of these youngsters, why they can't certainly establish themselves as a strong Eliteserian side every year, and don't get sucked into what they've been in the past, which is sort of mid to lower side who've been relegated sometimes. So it's about building up a dynasty, I suppose, isn't it? They're not going to be able to keep players for very long that are very good, but now it is about recruitment for them, I think, coming up in the future.
And what do you think about the role of their manager in terms of the development of the players, as you've mentioned there? How well has he done, and will he be maybe someone looked at by the likes of Rosenborg, who are well off it, and maybe Brann, those kind of teams? Does he have any kind of potential to move on? I mean, Hakon Evjen at 19 has moved on. Is this a team that might get broken up? Bodø Glimt, could this be their one season, or what? Let's talk about the manager first.
Yeah, the manager, Kjetil Knudsen, he keeps it simple. I think that's one of the big positives. They've played 4-3-3 every single week, John. Nothing changes. They're not looking to adapt their style depending on who they're going to play this year. And I mean, some might consider that a negative. Some would consider it a positive. They're basically saying, we're going to do our thing. We're not going to worry about you. You've got to beat us. And it's quite an open style of football. And they have been exposed sometimes, like when they lost 6-0 against Vålerenga. But yeah, I like his style. He plays entertaining football, proactive football. They're not looking to be negative. So it is, for some of the bigger clubs, they could do far worse than someone like Knudsen, I think. And as for whether the team will get broken up, well, we know Leuni's gone, Evjen's on his way out. I don't really know. I mean, with Norwegian sides, any team can get broken up, even the big ones. But hopefully it won't. Hopefully they can keep the core of their players and then just add, some bits of quality to try and replace guys like Evjen coming into next year. It's been really refreshing how they've shocked everyone like this, and fair play to them. They have been dropped points recently, but we've got to remember this team on paper, like I said, is only really good enough for mid-table.
Yeah, and if you look at their recent history, they've been in the lower divisions as well. So this is really a fantastic fairy tale story, to be honest. And well done to them, and obviously well done to our man Tom Dent, who's been on the show before. It's a fantastic, as we say, fairy tale adventure, and let's hope that they can keep. I think at Evjen, just to talk about that transfer, by the way, it's the biggest sale in Bodø's history at 25 million Norwegian crowns, surpassing the previous record sale. So that's maybe good for their future as well. It can maybe secure some funds and help them maybe rebuild no matter what happens this season. And who knows, they might well have European football to deal with next season. Steve, ready to move on if you are. I think I would like to ask you about Molde, who are top of the table. We can't ignore them. You tipped them to win the title last season, in pre-season on the pod, and you've got it bang on so far. They're 5 points clear, with Rosenborg 12 points off them, nowhere near to be seen. Looks like their reign is ending. I want to ask you, in fact, I'm going to reverse the order in which we discussed Molde, because I want to ask you about Ole Gunnar Solskjaer. I think it's time we had a little bit of an update, because we had a podcast when he left for Manchester United. Obviously, I think that was last season, somewhere around December, and which you can still listen to, by the way. Subscribe to us on iTunes if you can, and leave us a rating, but or follow us at Nordic Foot Pod for more episodes. But Steve, Molde are top without Solskjaer. So given the situation at Manchester United since he's left, since he's joined, he's not, he had an incredible start, but since he signed a 3-year contract, I think Manchester United have won roughly 6 games out of 18, if I remember rightly, 19 maybe. Molde are top regardless, Steve. So what does that say about A, Molde, and B, Solskjaer?
Well, I did say in the podcast we did talking about Ole Gunnar Solskjaer roughly, 10 months ago now, that it wasn't the worst thing that he was to leave Molde, because I felt he was a little bit stale there in his second spell. Look, if he'd been in charge this year, they probably would still be where they are, to be honest. But, caretaker manager Erling Moe has pretty much stayed in that role all year. And you know what? I've seen him come to some criticism around early mid-season, when they drop points. But, I mentioned in the last podcast how I think his squad rotation system is actually is going to be a real asset for them going forward. Because, like, for example, today, they beat Lillestrøm 2-1. Last kick of the game they beat them. That's a pretty big win for them. But, they had suspensions. Uwe was suspended. Magnus Wolf Eikrem was suspended. And, they had to bring guys in who, had they not been playing minutes in the Europa League or in the league, then they might be nervous that they can't come in and do a job. But this squad has been really well rotated in terms of freshness and also to keep competitive duties flowing. And they've got that 5-point gap on Bodø Glimt, 8 points to odd. I think that's enough now, to be honest. I think that they've got 2 or 3 tough games to come, so they needed that victory today. But as long as they just keep ahead, like they've got Brann away coming up this weekend, that looks like a fixture they could probably drop points in, to be honest with you. Got Rosenborg away as well. So they needed that victory, but they've got a really big squad, and the depth in that squad has really served them well this year. They've got money in the bank from Erling Braut Haaland's deal, and I would imagine they've hopefully got a good percentage sale on when he moves from Salzburg to somewhere, because I could imagine that being a huge move in the future, couldn't you?
Yeah.
10 or 20% of that is going to put this club well set financially going forward.
We'll talk about him in a minute, because I do definitely want to touch on him before we finish this show. A fantastic Champions League debut for him. But back to Solskjaer, I just wanted to ask you, before we move on to Molde, what's your personal opinion? I mean, you said that you thought he'd gone a bit stale there. Do you see any similarities in what happened in his time at Molde with maybe what's happening now with Manchester United? I mean, he's gone for youth at Manchester United. He's had trouble maybe implementing a kind of attacking style. That their team is averaging sort of 1 goal a game over the last sort of 7-8 games, going back to last season. They're struggling to score goals. Defensively, some slight improvements, but still conceding in games against West Ham and things like that. Do you see any kind of similarities in the project that he's trying to lead at United? They've come out and sort of supported him quite heavily, saying he won't be leaving no matter what happens. Do you see any similarities in what happened at Molde, or do you think is there any kind of differences that you've seen in the Molde Solskjaer versus the United Solskjaer?
I said in that podcast last year, I'm not actually sure he's that good a manager. I'm not saying he's a bad manager. I just see him somewhere sort of average, really. I don't think he's particularly great. I don't think he's great at anything apart from, sort of dealing with younger players and that sort of thing. Tactically, I think there's a lot of question marks with Solskjaer. The only time he ever really impressed me was his first stint at Molde. I honestly think, and he will laugh at this, but I think Cardiff City kind of broke him a bit, He was exposed there badly, wasn't he? And he just never looked the same manager when he came back.
But you mentioned tactically, Steve. Like, let's delve into this, because obviously there's a lot of surface discussions. But you said you're not convinced with him tactically. Can you elaborate a little bit?
Well, I would say I've always think with Solskjaer, if his first plan is not working and it's not going very well, he's always struggled with in-game decisions to try and improve things or change things, especially if they're chasing a game of football. That is tactically where I would say he's not that strong. But that's quite a subjective personal opinion, really. And it's very hard to compare Manchester United to Molde, really. It's almost unfair to, actually, isn't it? Because of the type of players that you've got available at you. But I felt in his second spell at Molde, I just felt it got a bit stale. It just looked like he wasn't enjoying it as much, you know what I mean? And they dropped a lot of silly points in that particular spell. But, whether or not, some people will be asking the question, how long until he's back in the Molde job? Because, there seems to be a lot of speculation that he's not going to last the pace at Man United. But
I think the tactical point you make there is very interesting, because that does ring home with what I've seen from United this season in terms of his in-game changes or lack of changes at times. I think the example of, not to talk too much about England, but Marcus Rashford last week, when he played him for the full 90 in the Europa League, and then the full 90 the following Sunday when he was blowing after 20 minutes, I think. And then 60th minute, he did his groin or hamstring, was it? I think, and he already looked tired after 10 minutes, let alone the 60, and went off and was out for 2 or 3 weeks. So I really do think you're onto something there, to be fair, Steve. So that is an interesting point. I don't know if you want to wrap it up there with any other concluding comments. We'll move on otherwise. But.
Yeah, just going back to a very recent game, the one at West Ham United. United was struggling, weren't they, in the first half there, conceded a goal, and you think things are going to change, but nothing did change. I don't know whether he's incapable of reading game situations, or, I say, when plan A goes out the window, what's plan B and C? I think the only real time he impressed me in that way at United was against PSG in Champions League, although you could say he got a bit lucky there as well. it felt like in the first sort of month or two at United, that was the only time I've seen him sort of be a bit innovative and different. But yeah,
This is what I've seen for sure. I think they've looked a little bit out of ideas, to be honest, attacking wise. And Mourinho was criticised for the attacking construction, but I think they look a little bit more out of ideas, in my opinion. They look as if they're winging it at times. And the in-game substitutions, as you've mentioned, is that a squad thing because of the lack of maybe quality in the squad, or is that a managerial thing? We don't know, but one to watch anyway. But yeah, Molde, regardless, are top and doing pretty well, Steve. So it looks like they could well win the title. So let's move on. We're going to wrap this pod up quite soon, I think, but we just want to talk about Europe briefly, because there's a couple of teams involved in Europe, aren't there?
Yeah, Rosenborg lost their first fixture in the Europa League. It was 1-0 away. LASK Linz, Austrian outfit. And if you want to find out more about them and you want to listen to the podcast that I made a brief appearance on, the other Bundesliga podcast is a good source of Austrian information. And then Malmö lost as well, didn't they? 1-0 against Dynamo Kiev. But perhaps more importantly is the game to look forward to. This Thursday, funnily enough, we were on about the Royal League, weren't we, a few podcasts ago, and now we're going to have that chance. Malmö against FC Copenhagen in the Europa League. That's a really big fixture, a local derby of sorts.
It is indeed, and yeah, I mean, let me just read anyone who's not familiar with this statistic. Distance from Malmö to their most closest league game in Sweden, 64.8 kilometers. Distance from Malmö to their Europa League opponents, FC Copenhagen, 41 kilometers. So it's actually a closer game than a European game that's closer than a domestic game, which is, I don't know how many times you see that coming, but yeah, they're 64 kilometers away from Helsingborg, which is the closest neighbor in Sweden. I mean, that will be a big game, no doubts about that whatsoever. And could that maybe affect their title race in any way? I think it will. There's no doubt it will be hotly contested from the fans' point of view, because there is a little bit of a niggly rivalry between those two regions. Anyway, there's a bit of a comparison every now and then. And you mentioned some cultural factors there, Steve. I certainly think there's a bit of a cultural rivalry in that sense between Sweden and Denmark in that sense. And I think there's a bridge that separates them, which is it's a very, very easy to get between the two. So definitely going to be an interesting game, I think, those two rounds. But yeah, I think we'll talk about the relegation battle in the next podcast on Norway. There's still 7 games left. Don't forget, we're not as close to the end of the season as we are in Sweden. I'll be certainly looking forward to Ostersunds against Djurgården coming up. And don't forget, you can follow us on Twitter at Nordic Foot Pod, and you can like us as well on the Nordic Football Podcast on Facebook. You can get us on Patreon as well, Nordic Football Podcast, if you'd like to support us financially with some a beer a month or something like that. But yeah, we've really enjoyed the show. We've run over a little bit, but I hope we've offered you some value on Djurgården and Bodø Glimt, 2 of the best teams in both leagues this season, some insight. And we'll be back for another show pretty soon. So keep it tuned to the Nordic Football Podcast. Don't forget you can subscribe on iTunes and all your usual places. And from me, Jonathan Fadugba, and Steve Wyss, it's been great to discuss some Nordic football podcasts again, Steve, and speak to you soon.
Yeah, a pleasure as always, Jonathan. And thanks for listening, everyone. We will see you again very soon. Goodbye.